Good evening. This is CTV News for Wednesday, April 4th. I'm Denise Douglas.
And I'm Patricia Malone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Well, topping the news tonight, a guilty verdict in the double murder trial of Darren Boswell Johnson, the man who gunned down a mother and child 2 years ago. Byron Scott has our story.
Killing a child is an act of war. Killing or injuring a child is an act of war.
Prince George's State's Attorney Angela Also Brooks announcing today the murder conviction of Darren Boswell Johnson in connection with the death of Nashante Davis and their daughter, 2-year-old Chloe.
It was very calculated. He planned it. He sat in front of her home, laying in wait 2 or 3 doors down from where her home was, waiting for her to come out that morning. Not only killed her, shot her in the back. You know, a cowardly act, shot her in the back and then walked up to that car and shot the baby in her head.
It was a crime that shocked the county. February 2nd, 2016 in Fort Washington. Johnson shot both of them. Chloe was fastened in the car seat at the time.
She also considered him a friend.
For the family, the murders came out of nowhere. They had known and liked Johnson for years.
She didn't see this coming. They've been high school friends they've been friends since high school. So she considered him a friend.
During the 7-day trial, jurors were shown portions of an interview between Johnson and 2 detectives in the hours following the crime. For most of the hours-long interview, he denied any involvement. Luis Cruz was one of the detectives.
In many ways, it's kind of like a game of chess. You know, he has his mindset on fooling not only the police department, but everyone around him. And it's just, you know, in those moments, who's going to last more?
Eventually, Johnson admitted his role, told police where he ditched the weapon, and explained that he killed the 2 because he didn't want to pay $600 a month in child support payments. The jury deliberated for under 2 hours before handing down the verdict.
It was as if a weight was lifted off of us. Hearing the verdict, hearing them say guilty, was if the time finally came for us to receive justice and for our angels to finally rest.
The family was asked if they had any words to express to Johnson.
We pray that you find some sort of forgiveness within yourself. We've had to forgive you to be able to move on and move past this, and that we just continue to pray for him and his family.
Sentencing in this case is scheduled for June 21st. Prosecutors say they will ask for life without parole. At the courthouse, Byron Scott, CTV News.
Thank you for that story, Byron. It was a turbulent day that tore at the soul of the nation. 50 years ago today in Memphis, Tennessee, the man known as the Drum Major for Peace was assassinated. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the leader of America's civil rights movement, was killed on April 4th, 1968. His murder sparked days of violent disturbances across the country. Observing that infamous day, a local faith-based organization held a rally in D.C. calling for an end to racism. Despite the rain, many people attended to speak up for social justice and equality.
We've been dreaming about and rehearsing Dr. King's dream for 50 years, and more people who are black and brown are in jail. More children are going to bed hungry. 40% of the poor are still children. Black people are now being treated like animals by police, even without guns, and there's no redress of those grievances. That is not the dream of Dr. King.
I think it's time out for these kumbaya worship services. It's time for us to say, okay, we can attack economic injustice. We can attack joblessness and absence of health care. We can do those things that make up for, you know, what has been done to black people through the years.
50 years later, Dr. King was talking about, at the end of his life, the giant triplets of evil: racism, poverty, and war, militarism. And those are all on the rise in this country. So he would say, wait a minute, let's bring faith back into the conversation, which he wasn't just a civil rights leader, a justice leader. He was summoned by faith, his faith to all of this. So we are too, summoned by faith to be here. So this is a moment in time where we either go deeper or things will unravel.
Today's rally marks the launch of a multi-year program called the Truth and Racial Justice Initiative. As the nation pauses today to remember the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., 4 prominent county residents have clear memories of where they were 50 years ago today. Judge Alexander Williams, County Administrator Howard Stone, registered nurse Becky Battisford, and Reverend Perry Smith all talk about where they were on April 4th, 1968. Judge Williams was a store clerk on 8th Street when the disturbances began. Battisford was working at Hub Furniture at 7th and D Streets. Reverend Smith worked for the county and was riding in a truck patrol along Southern Avenue to keep potential rioters from entering Prince George's County. Stone was a teen in Anacostia watching news and reports on plumes of smoke billowing across the city.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop.
I was 16 years old. I was still in high school, and in Washington, we were living, I guess, the safe, comfortable life. Parents worked for the government, and I mean, it was just a safe life, and you had no issues. But when you saw the riots and you saw those people out there looting, and they weren't looting just to loot, they were looting because of frustration, because of a need.
I was working at Hub Furniture Company on 7th and D Street, and my mother worked right next door at the insurance company. I was a cashier, and the bosses came by and said girls were closing. And we weren't sure what was going on. The smoke was probably coming from 14th Street, but you could see smoke all over, and you could even smell it. Then I got scared.
I worked at the Safeway as part of a job I had as a college student, and that afternoon, people started running inside the store saying they had just killed Martin Luther King, and people are gathering for whatever they were going to do. They closed the Safeway very quickly and told us to go home or get out of the area. And quite candidly, it was a ugly scene. There was looting going on. People were carrying furniture and TVs, and jewelry stores were vandalized. And then people started to take clothes from the clothing stores, and then they started to burn the buildings and the establishments. I don't think any of us recognized the anger that was in the eyes and feelings of so many citizens in Washington. And that event, the killing of Martin Luther King in Memphis, Tennessee, became the catalyst for all types of anger displays that took place in Washington at that time.
I was instructed to ride the line, Southern Avenue, and encourage people not to come across that line because the police had instructions. They were going to protect that line.
In my first week working in Upper Marlboro back in 1976, I went to a lunch. It was called the Old Town Inn, but not the Old Town as it is now. It was owned by whites then. And I went in there to get a bite to eat, and they used to have a bar in the middle of the restaurant, and there were state's attorneys, investigators, and police sitting around the bar. And you know what their topic of conversation? How they had just beat, and they said just beat the N-words to keep them from coming into Prince George's County.
It was a season of killings, as a matter of fact. It really was. There was never a time when one can lift one's eyes and without tears because of the deaths of these persons who really, in many ways, stood for right and righteousness. And of course, it put a fire in my belly at that point to see what might I do to help the movement.
The things that happened around Dr. King's assassination, they really they more than sparked my interest, because I looked at inequalities that we have right in our own black community. I mean, the things that happen and the need for what I call social justice. And that was really what sparked my interest to become a public servant.
I had been given the gift. I wanted to be a nurse, and I thought I could help humanity being a nurse and advocating for people.
Seeing so much anger It certainly woke me up and certainly let me know that I need to work harder in school to achieve my goal of being a lawyer so that I could get out there in the forefront and get into these social issues.
To those who much is given, much is required. And, you know, Dr. King was the person that called us to action to do this.